Okay, thank you very much for your attention on this paper, which is, well, something else, I guess. I'm going to be talking about Bob Flanagan, who is one of the people who suffers from an illness which is not that iconic. Contrary to tuberculosis in the 19th century, HIV and AIDS in the 20th century, and maybe COVID-19 in the 21st century so far, he is much more than an host to his illness, which is cystic fibrosis. Bob Flanagan's real strength is the fact that he managed to become much more than, or rather, to stay much more than the illness that really tried to kill him through his use of BDSM, of masochism, really. Medicine in his work, since he is a poet, a visual artist, a performer, is very important since, well, the medical world has been monitoring his activities, which we will see in one of his poems I'm going to present a little later. I'm going to try and see how the spaces of medicine, of the medical world, intersect with his artistic life, because he is a full-fledged artist, really. He really strived to show how his twin maladies, being sick from cystic fibrosis and S&M, are important, and we can see him here on this, well, on this slide, with his wife and partner and dominatrix, Cherie Rose, who is still alive today, and who is a visual artist herself. She's a photographer and well, and she recorded many of Bob Flanagan's works. I'm going to be talking about the illness, well, his illness and the medical discourse surrounding it, about sadomedicine, which is not something that he came up with, this term, which is something that Linda Kauffman, I think, used in order to present how he dealt with his illnesses. And then I'm going to show you Visiting Hours, which was one of his greatest endeavors, where he really mixed art and the medical world in both as written forms and a lot of elements in the museum that he presented this in. Bob Flanagan is, or rather had himself known as Supermasochistic Bob. This is something that he uses a lot, as you can see in the top part of the screen. This is the cover of a book devoted to him. He sang a song on the air of Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and we can hear a little bit of it if we have time, and if you don't hear it, well,
he was too precocious. How much longer he will
you
live
have
is
the lyrics
anyone's
obviously
prognosis.
on the screen.
Supermasochistic Bob, cystic fibrosis.
And
Live a
as
little
you can
longer,
see,
die.
it is painful. He is coughing. He is still having the audience laugh because he was a funny man, really, and he really tried and mix art, his illness, and whatever was going on in contemporary in the popular culture around him. Bob Flanagan was sick, and the dichotomy between the two words, or the two meanings of sick, is very important in what he was doing. Here on this picture, you do not see him smoking. You see him obviously taking his medicine for CF, trying to have his lungs cleaned. But this does not look like the picture of a sick man who is having his medicine, obviously. When his wife, Cher Rose, wrote the postface to his journal, she entitled it In Semi-Sickness and in So-Called Health, because nothing is as it seems with him. Obviously, nothing says lovin' like something in a coffin, which is something he used in one of his books, in a posthumous book, as you can see, is also something that comes back again and again. Being in a coffin is important when you're still living, and he tried and perform, well, using a real coffin and a screen that showed his face. He also wanted to record himself as he was decomposing, but this did not take place for a lot of reasons, really. The double meaning is everywhere in his work, and as you can see, SOB, which stands for shortness of breath, which is a medical term to talk about cystic fibrosis and how his lungs were behaving, is also the acronym for son of a bitch, and that's also something he uses in his in his journals, really. The poem Why may encapsulate this dichotomy, the constant to and fro between being sick and being, well, someone who performs S&M really well. It's a free-form poem, like many of his works, which does address the great question that is always asked of him. Why is he, doing all that with BDSM? Why is he performing the way he is? This part is taken from the end of the poem. And, he says that first he explores a very paranoid fantasy. I used to think that I was part of some vast experiment, and that there was this implant that made me do these things and allowed them to monitor my activities. The monitoring of his activities was something that really was, going on throughout his life, as he was in and out of the hospital a lot in his youth, obviously. The thing that he describes next, the fact that he had to take his clothes off and lie inside this giant plastic bag so the doctors could collect his sweat, sounds barbaric, but it's actually one of the ways to diagnose cystic fibrosis, because the sweat contains, markers that show that someone is indeed cystic fibrosis sufferer. Because he was born in a world of suffering, because he learned to take his medicine, and here the verb take takes a lot of meanings, because he was a big boy for taking it, and because he can take it like a man. That means, to be able to, well, make do with everything that was going on to him, make do with the symptoms of his illness, the fact that both his respiratory and digestive systems were undergoing problems all the time, that this illness is a degenerative illness, really. Taking it is also the way he sees his practice of BDSM, obviously, and the way he is able to sustain great pains, voluntary pains, this time around. Oh, sorry. He also tried to endeavored and tried to demedicalize the hospital. When he was hospitalized, especially during the last year of his life, he wrote a journal, the pain journal, and he describes during these moments at the hospital actual facts that were happening to him. This BCO2, is PO2, the fact that he had to be hooked to several machines, the fact that he had to wear a porta pack as well. He wrote about these experiences without trying to make them more than they were, really, without trying to make to make more than descriptions, than formal descriptions of what was happening to him. Yet his artistic work was really trying to turn the rituals around being ill, being sick, being dying, into something else. He tried to museify the illness, which is something we will see a little further, and tried to share the experience. I was very surprised to see that the smell of the waiting room Elise talked to us about is also something that he tried to do, trying to get the smell of the waiting room, trying to get visitors to his exhibitions aware of all the senses, of all the experiences that he could go through, or that people could go through when they were sick. I'm going to turn to Sadomedecine. That is the way he used medical elements in order to make himself feel better. And making himself feel better, obviously, is part of the whole BDSM thing. S&M makes fun of what I have to do. When he says that, he actually says the fact that there were a lot of complications. He says, I quote, my sister had CF, much worse than I. And towards the end, it seemed like every 6 months, A new complication was added: diabetes, heart problems. She would cry a little bit and go, well, I've got to deal with that now. And that's also something that he tried to do within his work. His sister died when she was 17. He himself is one of the longest survivors of cystic fibrosis, died when he was 42, which is really old in the 90s. The suspensions he does, because here you can see him, he is wearing a hospital gown, which, well, gets pulled away as he's suspended in the air. This is the beginning of the suspension. Actually, he goes 5 meters up well, the sky, not really, but in the museum space. But this is something that he wants to do. It's something that he chooses to do with his partner of his own volition. So these suspensions, which are something that BDSM practitioners do often, does not make him vulnerable. It's a real combination of a nature morte and a tableau vivant, really, because he is still being vulnerable. He's being hoisted up in the sky, or up in the museum, really. But these mechanical situations that he goes through mirrors all the complications of his life. He is in a medical bed, or in a medicalized bed here within the space of the museum, and still he tries to surmount whatever was happening to him, to his condition, through his practice of BDSM and of, well, performance art, really. He was described, and you can see him here sitting on his hospital bed during the exhibition. He right tried to show what being sick meant, how being sick affected his S&M lifestyle, had made him do less and less things, but turned him into something else, something a little maybe more. The installation, I'm going to try and go a little faster, that he showed at the new museum. It's actually an exhibition that he showed in several museums across the United States. Is a mix between a children's residential hospital, where he spent a lot of time as a child, and, well, an array of all the BDSM paraphernalia he liked. The up, I'm gonna, yeah, okay. I'm going a little faster than expected, and I'm going to show you first how he hospitalized the museum. All the space that was given to him was turned into different sections. There were no corridors, and once again, I was thinking about Elise's presentation, but really an area of little rooms, a waiting room, as you can see, a medical room where he was set in. You can see the ropes for the suspension in the on the second picture on the left. This was turned into an hospital room where he stayed during the whole 2 months of this exhibition. He tried to be as honest as possible, and his honesty, the fact that he described his illness in a very transparent way, is important in his work. And okay, he also became something more. He became a father confessor, which is something that several people talk about. He himself says stories of being of the hospital. My typical visitor was a woman who would sit in the chair and say, well, Bob, boy, my dad's in the hospital and he has cancer. Um, the fact that his position as a sick person being on display, well, turns him into much more than just a sick person that is on display. It turns him into the passageway through which visitors, could really tell him about everything that was happening. As Kauffman says, they sat by his bedside sharing stories about their own experiences with an array of very severe illnesses. He also tried and materialized CF. For instance, this wall with the cubes where S&M and CF, cystic fibrosis, were written on is one of the, masterpieces, or the main pieces of his work. The number of cubes represents the number of variants of cystic fibrosis, so the number of ways CF could affect one's life, really. This is also a repetition of things. You know, there is a piecing together of a lot of disparate little pieces to form that very big wall. Once again, the mix of the way he was when as a child, the mix of being in a children's hospital, the cheer of being in a hospital for children, as Trippy said on the brochure for this exhibition, and yet still the way he mixes it with S&M and with this impenetrable wall of very small wooden cubes. His death, unfortunately, is also evoked in throughout his work. He almost got a lung transplant, and that was a hope for the very last years of his life. And actually, well, unfortunately, this did not come through. His death was important in a documentary I did not talk about today, but a very important documentary about him entitled Sick, obviously, where Cherie Rose and Bob Flanagan both wanted his death to be monitored. I'm not going to show you the sequence, but it's actually quite long. Cherie Rose had filmed his entire agony, and this atmosphere with the beeping machines, the way Cherie Rose talks to him, the way his nurses talk to him as well, is part of this depiction. He wanted to be preserved, really, and that's also something I evoked really briefly with the viewing, a piece which never, came through. Dying for him is easy for himself. The dying is easy. It's hard for the surviving spouses, families, and nations who do suffer. We dead folk are resting 6 feet under, not a care in the world, fucking selfish sons of bitches that we are. Indeed, this, for him, the whole dying is the way it is in the video, which you will maybe see. It's available on YouTube for some reason. And it's very voyeuristic, but it's part of his works. And on the last picture that you can see, Cherie Rose has kept not his organs, but the mucus from his lungs that was taken from his lungs during this last hospitalization, as if conserving pieces of his body, as if conserving artifacts of his body was a way to keep him alive. I'm going to conclude now on the fact that he empowered himself through the use of the medical discourses he heard. He was able to take it as a man, of the medical things that were around him, because he uses needles and element from the medical world to pierce his skin, to perform his art, really. He tries to record, to analyze, and through the exploration of the intersection between the medical world and the BDSM world. Everything that he does in his art is voluntary. That's the reason why the masochist is a strong person for him. Because this is the reverse of what he has to undergo because of cystic fibrosis. Creating paradoxical contradictions is a way he uses to cheat death and to stay alive even after his death, or rather to be still an influence. And yet, although he was a poster boy from hell for CF, in his own words, he still influenced Martin O'Brien, who works now with Cherie Rose. And he was still visited by a young girl from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, because she herself suffered from cystic fibrosis, was really influenced positively by Flanagan's way of, surviving, really. Now, just have to thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And yeah, I hope to hear from you all very soon. Thank you.